This week on Quadriga, abortion, a matter of life and death. Texas has approved a bill that will shut down most abortion clinics in the state. 13 states in the US have now tightened rules on when and where an abortion may take place. Predominantly Catholic Chile has an outright ban on abortion. But the case of an 11-year-old girl who became pregnant after being raped has sparked a debate on whether abortion should be legalized. Ireland is in the process of legislating for abortion for the first time. An expectant mother whose life is threatened would be eligible to terminate the pregnancy. There is now a global battle over women's right to choose and the right to life. Your host this week, Ali Aslan.
Hello and welcome to Quadriga. Very few issues are as hotly debated as the issue of abortion. And the most recent developments and incidents in the United States, in Chile and in Ireland have revealed once more how great the divide between the pro-choice and the pro-life camps really is. So today we will look at the various arguments with these following three guests. Welcome to Alexander Görlach, who's the founder, publisher and editor-in-chief of the German magazine The European. A theologian by training, he has also written for several of Germany's leading newspapers. Melissa Eddy is the Berlin correspondent for the International Herald Tribune, the global edition of the New York Times. She's an American journalist who covers gender equality issues in Europe. And Josephine Landertinger Forero, who is a documentary filmmaker and the director of Globalized Production, a media company that focuses on human rights issues and gender equality. Melissa Eddy, if we look at these most recent incidents and developments in the United States, in Chile, in Ireland, but also in El Salvador, we're looking at a resurgence, if you will, of this hotly debated issue called abortion. Now, many people thought that this issue is more or less settled by laws and that the two camps more or less have, if you will, agreed to a truce. Now we're seeing quite on the contrary. This debate is very polarizing and it rages on. What do you think now? Why do you think this is?
I don't know if it's a question of any specific thing that has caused it to resurge. I think you have to look at just, this is an issue of life and death. It is an extremely emotional issue, and therefore, I think it goes on all the time at different levels, and it flares up when there is some sort of a catalyst, like we've seen in Chile with the 11-year-old girl, or in Ireland, or even in the United States, where with the shifting of the political parties, interest groups, the push to still continue to try to legislate this just brings it up to the forefront. And it's sort of, it was due, if you will, in a way, in the cycle of the U.S. political debate.
So, Ms. Landertinger Forero, so this issue never really went away?
Well, I think it depends on which part of the world we're talking about. I think in Europe, apart from the Irish question, abortion is quite settled. I mean, you have a great consent in almost all European countries, with some exceptions, that abortion is legal, it can be done safely. Europe has the lowest abortion rates in the world, and so I think it really depends on which world region we're talking about when we're talking about like the emotions and abortion. And
indeed, you have mentioned Europe, where the issue is by and large settled by law, but there are great differences, Alexander Görlach, for instance in Poland and most notably in Ireland. We have just seen the debate rage on and being led in an extremely passionate, if not even hostile, manner in Ireland. Ireland now, for the very first time in its history, has passed an abortion law which allows abortion, allows the termination of pregnancy when the life of the mother is at stake. At the end of the day, though, many critics are saying, many pro-choice critics are saying, or proponents rather, are saying this law does not go enough.
Well, Ireland was the last country, if I remember correctly, in Europe who allowed divorce. So maybe that is because of the very Catholic background of this specific country. However, if you remember Germany, we had this this huge debate about the law of abortion. Then after the reunification, where the former East and the former West had several different laws, so we had again a debate about that. And I guess it touches the innermost part of what society we want to live in. What does it mean if we have societies, it's not in Europe, but societies where if you have gonna have a baby, a baby girl, you abort it, whether or not. What is that kind of? It tells a lot about who we are, and this is and how we want to live, and this is why it's so emotional, I guess.
It's a very emotional subject matter for sure.
I think if you look as well, though, you can't disregard, just in Germany several months back, we had the whole debate in Cologne where it was discovered that there was a church or a hospital that is affiliated with the church where they were refusing to counsel a young woman on abortion. So I think you can say, oh, you know, it is settled in Europe, but again, it flares up. There are moments where, because each side believes so strongly on the ethics of this, the right to life, the right to choice, that even in a country which appears to have done away with that battle, somewhere under the surface, it's still percolating.
And it's true that Germany also had a very raging debate about this paragraph 218 back in the days. And as you say, it comes up every now and then. Melissa, Eddie, let's look at these various cases briefly. Let's look at Texas, for instance. The state of Texas now bans abortion after 20 weeks of pregnancy, and most of the abortion clinics have been shut down in Texas. Now, we had, of course, the Roe versus Wade decision by the Supreme Court in 1973, but we are seeing a trend now where various U.S. states are chipping away of that law and trying to make abortion, if not illegal, but then certainly impractical.
Right, right. No, definitely. I mean, ever since Roe versus Wade was passed, there have been attempts to reel it back. It's gone before the court again, and right now, with the polarization of the two political camps in the United States, I think it's certainly an issue where politicians feel that they can gain a lot of political capital. Someone like Rick Perry, by saying, okay, what we're doing here is protecting this unborn life, and he's able to sell this idea of closing down these clinics by what they're doing is setting the bar higher, and they have to have higher surgical standards, which cost a lot of money. And in the very poor areas of Texas, which is where these clinics do the most good, because it's where you have women who don't have access to birth control. They're on Medicaid already. They're already relying on the government.
Latinas.
And a lot of Latinas. But it's also the whole culture of Texas, where they, in high schools, they, preach abstinence. Well, maybe that's a good idea, but at the end of the day, it's Texas, amongst all U.S. states, has the highest rates of teen pregnancies. And at some point, you have to look at the numbers and say, okay, you have unborn life, but you also have life. What is happening to these young women? And what is then ultimately happening to these children who they bring into the world? Where are they being educated? Who's supporting them? Ms.
Landertinger-Ferrero, Milseri says that in the case of Texas, for instance, the issue of abortion is being used, if not even abused, as a political issue, if you will, on the part of the leadership. Do you think that's also the case in Chile, where we have the 11-year-old rape victim who is not allowed to abort the pregnancy, and where President Piñera actually came out and praised the 11-year-old for her depth and maturity for wanting to keep the baby?
Yeah, exactly. I don't know how many mature 11-year-olds you know. I don't know many, and I don't think small Belen is an exception. I think definitely there are tons of political interests, and in Latin America you have to also talk of the Catholic Church as very influential, also in the mindset of people, which doesn't mean that abortions are not made. I mean, even being illegal, even being dangerous, even being unsafe, there are 4.2 million unsafe abortions in Latin America. So even Catholic women, abort. And so I think that definitely regulations and legislation are very much down to political interests and interests of the church.
Alexander Gerlach, unsafe abortions. 50% of all abortions, says the World Health Organization, says 50% of the abortions worldwide are unsafe and take place in the developing world. Unsafe meaning that the doctor lacks the skills to perform this abortion and that minimum medical standards are not being met. What would you say as somebody, if you will, who comes from a rather pro-life camp? What would you say to that?
Well, I guess that abortion has been around all the time. It's not a phenomenon of our days. So, and fortunately, today we have the medical institutions who help to do that properly. And I mean, you assume, since I'm Catholic, that I'm more in the pro-life camp, but that's well, we have to look at the things very closely to come to a very precise opinion on that. And I guess that I think it's not a question today whether or not there is a legal possibility to abort. I guess this is even for somebody. There are cases where you need medical support. But on the other hand, as I said earlier, it is a very general question about whether or not how we deal with the unborn life. And there is, as far as I understand those two camps, there is just an either or. It's not, well, let's talk about this. Do you protect either every unborn child or you don't? And I guess this is what makes this debate so engaged, if you want to say so.
And but I mean, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you have Europe, as I mentioned before, as a positive example for compromise. I mean, of course, it differs from country to country, but almost in the whole of Europe, you have the possibility to abort sort of in the first trimester of pregnancy. You get counseling, so you talk to gynecologists, to social workers, to psychologists, and so I think, yeah, there is the possibility of these camps finding consensus.
Melissetti, at the end of the day, it does boil down to what Alexander Gerlach was saying. It does boil down to the very ethical, philosophical question of whose right is at stake and whose right prevails here at the end of the day. It's always the question about the right of the unborn child versus the right of the mother to determine her own body and own fate. Do you think we will ever be able to resolve this issue in our lifetime?
No. I mean, I think it's a basic question of humanity. I think in terms of the consensus, as you pointed out, in Europe, because there's sort of become agreement in the first trimester, it's okay, it's allowed to have an abortion, and then afterwards there are certain circumstances. There's even been numbers in the United States showing that a majority believes that would be a better way to go. The problem is again, the emotions get so high that it comes down to this idea of who has then the ultimate right, the child or the mother. I think also we're seeing in places like Latin America, as women's rights become more talked about, more widespread, women are more willing now to demand what they weren't before. They're willing to stand up and say, well, this is my right, this is my body, this is my future, I get to decide. And I think that is going to have an influence on the nature of the debate moving forward.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, because I think also throughout time you can actually say that talking about abortion, and I mean, we're not talking about if you agree or disagree. We're talking about like legislation, hard facts. Is it legal or is it illegal? So, and I think in talking about this, and talking about like laws and legislation, you are definitely also talking about women's rights. And so I see the right to abort as definitely synonym to the right of the woman to empowerment, to recapturing her own body and of herself deciding what to do with her body, and not some other kind of person or state or institution telling her what to do.
But the thing is, if the state is not only a manager who just helps us like sorting things out, if the state says I have more idea or more precise idea of how we want to live and what this community is about, then of course the state has also a saying or an idea in what has to become of the unborn children. And I guess this is, I would agree that we are luckily in a secular state, and so there is a plurality in every aspect. I would totally agree to that. But on the other hand, it's not just only about the women or only about the unborn child, it's also about the whole of society. And on the other hand, which we too were just pointing out about the education education status in Texas or in Latin America, it's not only abortion, it's also contraception, which could precede any abortion. So there is like a lack of a common understanding of what sexuality is all about, I guess. And so the abortion as an ultima ratio is just the debate is too short if you only speak about that.
Oh,
so
yeah, definitely, I totally agree with you. I mean, what I was just saying is that it just comes down to, I mean, when we're talking, we came here to talk about abortion, not, of course, also to debate on the ethical questions, but I mean, we debate about ethical questions because you actually want to achieve something. And by living in a state, you want to achieve like laws and legislation and things you're actually like allowed to, like, where are your human rights? And I think that is the core or the essence of these ethical questions. We're not like just doing philosophy for the sake of doing philosophy. We actually want to achieve certain goals, or I see it that way.
And Melissa, Eddie, if we look at these incidents that have come up recently, do you think they have, if you will, they're going to have the impact of shifting public opinion one way or another? Let's look at the cases. In El Salvador, for instance, a 20-year-old with health problems was denied an abortion despite the fact that the fetus was underdeveloped and unlikely to survive. In Ireland, the law only was debated after an Indian woman lost her life. She died of sepsis. In Poland, the European Court of Human Rights ordered the Polish state to pay 14-year-old rape victim compensation because she was turned away from hospitals. Do you think all these cases, and the case in Chile, of course, all these cases combined will tip the scale one way or another?
I don't think it's necessarily can be looked at completely globally. I think each society is still trying to figure it out for itself, with the exception of Europe, where you have the European court, where you have the European system, which can put Poland under pressure and force the Poles to think about it. I think we're also seeing, though, the same shift in Polish society. You have a generation for which, you know, the communism, all of that is gone. They spent a lot of the youngest people have spent time in Ireland or in Great Britain, where they've been exposed to a lot of different thoughts and ideas. They come back to their country, and it's very strict Catholic, and they start to question that, and again, what society that they want to live in. I think in the United States, it's different just because of the nature of this whole debate and the way it's gone back and forth and back and forth. And it depends. I mean, right now you have a Democratic president in the White House in his second term. The Republicans are hot to make it. It's very political. And I don't think anyone in Texas, sadly, is looking across the border at Chile saying, how will this affect our debate? I think it's unfortunately, I think each country is still trying to decide for itself, because beyond the Catholic Church, there is really no ability to create a global legislation on this one, or a global answer.
And I guess we still, and luckily, speak about exceptions, like let's say an 11-year-old girl being raped is, I mean, I hope there's not so many cases after that. So if we have a public display of the abortion topic, it's because of such rare exceptions. And the other question is, what do we think generally about abortion? And like the Catholic perspective is a rather philosophical one. It's nowhere told in the scripture. It's just like saying, if there's a sperm and an ovum and they combine, and this is when human life starts, and from that moment on we have to protect it. This is a view which is also followed by some schools of law. It's not only something that Catholics would say is a God-given. It's just like also philosophical thought. And if we do not agree with that, then we have to find another point in the development of the fetus where we say, now this is a person. And I guess no rare case in Chile or El Salvador can help us not to answer that question, because it narrows down to that question.
But I think the case in Ireland did help them think about that question, because they said, okay, suddenly someone realized here was a healthy mother whose life was at risk because she was not allowed to abort a baby. And the idea, suddenly, it seemed to touch an emotional chord that, you know, what is the risk? You know, it's essentially, it is two lives. You have a life of the mother in this case and a life of the fetus, and determining where life begins is not enough to answer that question. And
Totally, and I think to me, but maybe I'm not. I think I'm sure about this, but maybe other people know that better. But I thought that the Catholic doctrine, if it comes to Poland or Chile or Ireland, that the Catholic doctrine would say if the life of the mother is at stake, that the life of the mother is the one at this instant to protect. So so we have in that case at least if you talk about canon law or theological understanding, a solution to that.
That's exactly the problem. The thing is that it's not. I mean, in Chile, you just can't abort under no circumstances. Even if you're going to die, you can't. And that's exactly what I was talking about. So, I mean, okay, there is a life being born, and I mean, it's a fact, but it also is, as you said, a theological and philosophical question of when exactly to determine when is this a human that also has human rights. And exactly, and so in Chile, the problem in Chile, in Malta, in many other countries of the world, the problem is that even if the life of the mother is at stake, you can't do an abortion. And I mean, that's what we are talking about. We need new legislation. I mean, this can't be, I mean, this is 2013 and an 11-year-old is not allowed to do an abortion. I mean, in what world are we living in?
And indeed, 7 Latin American countries disallow the practice of abortion under any circumstances. You mentioned Malta in Europe as well. But let's look again at what the World Health Organization is saying to that. They're saying more restrictive abortion laws do not necessarily lead to lower abortion rates. Quite on the contrary. Western Europe, you can argue, has one of the more liberal abortion laws, but Western Europe also has the lowest abortion rates in the world. So this calculation, if you will, to have more restrictive abortion laws, to have less abortion, it's not really, that doesn't really amount to anything at the end of the day.
It's sort of, you tell somebody, no, you can't do this, and, it doesn't necessarily mean that they won't. I think it also comes back to what we were talking about earlier, the whole picture. In Europe, there's a very open discussion early on about sexuality. Women are informed as teenagers or young women, girls, where they can get birth control. They have access to it. The idea that they are responsible for their own sexual safety is discussed. When you're only telling kids, male and female, don't have sex at 15, when hormones are raging and everything's setting in, what are their options? You're not leaving them, you're not educating them to make good choices, and therefore, even if you have extremely restrictive abortion laws, and they often go hand in hand. Like in Texas, abstinence. We don't talk about sex. Sex is after marriage. It's all fine and good, but the numbers are showing it's not working.
So there's no deterrence, Alexandra Gerlach, it seems. If we look at the pure statistics anyway, more restrictive abortion laws do not lead to fewer abortions. Quite on the contrary, what they lead to, however, are more unsafe abortions, and many women die due to these unsafe abortions. At the end of the day, in South Africa, for instance, a country that has relaxed its standards, has relaxed its laws, abortion-related death fell by 90% after the liberalization of the law. Wouldn't that be a plea more to liberalize abortion laws more worldwide?
I mean, this is like also in the US, I guess, that they say if you have, let's say, in terms of homosexuality, if you have like a relaxed, as you say, attitude towards it, then you may raise the numbers of homosexuals, which is not the case.
Well, that's restrictive, not relaxed.
Yeah, okay, but you know what I mean? It's like, so this is, of course, there's so many people saying if marijuana is legalized, you will not raise the number of people smoking pot. And I guess this is, even if these are 3 very different cases, I guess it's clearly, if you speak openly about things, if there is a discussion about it, it's not necessarily something that makes, let's say, the abortion numbers higher, or the number of homosexuals in the population higher, or the number of people smoking weed in the population higher. I guess this is something we could, I guess, all agree upon.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that what we're actually talking about are 2 different things. I mean, you have state as a regulator, and what state should do. It's to provide education, access to health, sexual education, the possibility to abort safely and hygienically by professionals. And on the other side, you have like the question of morality or immorality. But I mean, it's not up to the state to decide if something is moral or immoral. I mean, you know...
but the state does it all the time. That's why we have laws.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you know, there are so many other examples I could bring up. For example, if you are betraying your wife in a marriage, yeah, that might be immoral, but do you have to go to prison because, I don't know, you betrayed your wife? I mean, this is just one example just to say that not all actions that are immoral have to be illegal, and I think these are two different questions.
But you work and you are deeply into that, into gender questions and gender equality questions. And the thing is, the German law forbids to bring in a bride who is not deliberately willing to marry that husband. So if I come from whatever country and I say I just, you know, and this is forbidden by law, and you would agree to that, I'd say. But if this husband-to-be would say, this is my culture, my religion, my socio whatever background, and I wish this to do because to me it's not immoral or illegal, then you would say, no, this the law is higher. So you have to see, what do we do? If a Catholic mother says, well, okay, there is a law and I am allowed to have an abortion, but I'm Catholic, I won't abort. Then you would probably say, well, okay, that's your choice. Exactly. Then you have on the other hand, you have, let's say in India, the case, and again, gender questions, then you have in India that they would just say because of their cultural, religious, whatever background, would say, well, we abort female fetuses because it's just a girl. So then you would say, oh no, that
forbidden. It's by law. In India, you can't do it. It happens, but it's forbidden.
So as a law, but if you would you then allow them to? What would you do then to change that attitude? I mean, it's like it's good that you point that out because you have moral issues and legal issues and vice versa. And what do you do then to change that moral attitude? I mean, it pays into my argument. You would say, well, you say it's moral, but it's not because just because it's a girl, you can't just like abort it.
Yeah, exactly. I think it has to do with. The state as an educator, as providing information, as informing its citizens to them be able to actually decide and take the right decisions in the end. I think that's it. That's what we want, right? We want like...
yeah, but the state resembles or reverberates the moral of its people, which can be changing. No, yeah. But it's I mean, this is the very ideal kind of saying what I now say. But when I would say this is nothing which can ever change because our attitude toward things changes all the time. So the state also can change its moral and its idea on certain things. I wouldn't say the state has to defend everlasting values and God-given whatever things. But on the other hand, because you said the state, I said earlier the state is not just a manager, and you were just like saying, well, but the state has, and I would say clearly. The state and the laws and the politicians who are not just like only engineers, but also people with a moral understanding, they have also to come to ideas about whether or not how they deal with abortion, for instance.
Well, Melissa, one of the reasons, or the reasons why a woman decides to abort varies, socioeconomic reasons and so on and so forth. But what we know, one thing is for sure, that unintended pregnancy is the #1 reason for abortion. And for that, we have still millions of women, particularly in the developing world, who lack access to modern contraceptives and family planning methods and so on and so forth. So don't you think that's the route that we ought to look at first and foremost?
Absolutely, I do. But again, abortion will come into play with that. If you look at U.S. aid, where the United States government pays for health and education in developing countries, because of the abortion debate, they are not allowed to distribute condoms. They are not allowed to talk about birth control. And so you have this very impassioned debate where it sort of starts overriding other elements of society, or of the whole chain of events, I guess, that you could say leads to the issue of abortion. But it is viewed, unfortunately, in the United States, it's often just viewed separately. It's viewed as Roe versus Wade, this element of legislation and this attempt to legislate. And I find it very interesting or frustrating, really, that the very people who don't want higher taxes, they don't want the government in their life, but they want the government to enact these very strict laws about abortion. They feel very impassioned about it. So again, you know, that's why I feel like there is no end to this, because it's emotional. It becomes irrational at some point.
And Alexandra Gerlach, since we're talking about contraceptives, the church position, the Catholic Church position, still is somewhat rigid, remains rigid on that front.
And this is, I guess this is not only in Catholicism, the idea of fertility or birth control on the other end, I guess it's fueled from times where there were not, man was not a huge crowd. There was times when we were not so many, and the animals surrounding us were really, I mean, so this is where we always think more and more children, and just the fertility idea we relate to in the Bible or in other scriptures. And today there is 8 billion humans, and it's clearly that we don't have the resources to have another 2 or 3 or 4, and this is why our ideas of birth and our idea of family should change.
So would you say that the position on the part of the church is obsolete, is outdated?
Well, yeah, of course it is, and this is not only what I wanted to say. It's deeper rooted. The church maybe is like preserves these ideas of fertility and family and big families, because from back in the days, as I guess the religion of Islam is not very much on the contrary of that. So if you have global conferences on birth control issues, the Vatican and Muslim institutions go hand in hand in promoting this idea of big families.
I would like to add something. I mean, have you ever compared statistics to how many men are in power in a country and how restrictive abortion laws are? Or, and I mean, if you do this comparison, you might actually say that where women's rights are still not fully in power. You might say that there are higher abortion rates, that, I mean, the role of the woman is like a conservative one of a person who is there to bear a child, but not of an individual capable of taking its own decisions. And so I think that in many countries where this discussion is really heated up, there are still countries with fairly patriarchal views where people who decide on women or what women should do or not do are maybe male priests, male politicians, male doctors, I mean, you know, men in higher positions. So that's, I think, also one important question, and that's why I was saying at the beginning that by talking about abortion, you are actually talking also about the development of the empowerment of women.
And indeed, it is an important question, which I want to throw back at Alexandra Gerlach. It is true that most lawmakers worldwide, most politicians, lawmakers, and certainly clergymen are male. So it's basically predominantly male that is deciding the issue of abortion.
So now you're giving that. I mean, Jesus was a man, Buddha was a man, Muhammad was a man. I mean, this is like Plato was a man. So everything that what I guess, or most of the things our Western societies and our history of thought rests upon is made by men. But what can I say now? I mean, I'm a man myself.
We hope so. That's what we gathered you for. But at the end of the day, the question is, men are making laws and they don't have to live with the consequences.
I'd hope that a man can also be as compassionate as a woman about the issues we now debate, about, like, let's say, 11-year-old girl being pregnant. I hope men can be have as much sympathy and empathy for that girl, even if they are not by themselves capable of carrying out a child. I mean, this is what you referred to. And on the other hand, I would say, yeah, if you say, of course, women are, I guess, to each other more compassionate about this, about pregnancy, because I never can be pregnant.
But
so
I think it goes beyond compassion. I mean, an 11-year-old girl is definitely an issue of compassion, but it's also about the 21-year-old who is in college, who has one more year to graduate, who actually maybe is Catholic and doesn't really believe in abortion, but knows that if she has this child right now, even if she gives it up for adoption, she loses an entire semester. You know, in the United States, tens of thousands of dollars being paid for this education, but it's a setback, and therefore it becomes a socioeconomic decision as well. And I think that is something that Unfortunately, I think even as a woman, unless you're confronted with it, I don't know that you can say, I've never felt that I could say, you know, I would do this or that, because all of these different things come into play. And I think often abortion is not just about these very heart-wrenching exceptions of the woman who dies and the 11-year-old who's raped, but it's about the totally average young woman, or even a mother who already has 3 children and gets pregnant and thinks, I can't handle a 4th child. And then, you know, you not only have her life at stake, you have the stake of these 3 other kids. And it's, I think, more the very banal decisions of futures that are difficult to imagine, and certainly for, you know, a man even more so, because these are things that until you're confronted with, sometimes, you know, just kind of, you can't quite figure it out.
And it certainly doesn't stop with the abortion itself. Studies have shown that the woman is suffering psychological trauma oftentimes after the abortion as well. But let me get to one point which modern medicine now is enabling couples to determine whether the fetus has abnormalities, has, if you will, genetic diseases. And that is also, some people say, a form of abortion. There's some parents who have decided then not to carry out their child because they think, you know, the health of the child in the future is in danger. Many people are criticizing that. For now, we're in the process of making design babies, if you will. What do you say to that?
I say it's a very tough question. But I still say that each couple or each woman should be able to make her own decision. She should be able to do it. If I think it's the right decision or not, maybe it's my personal point of view, but I think if you're able to inform the parents of what are the consequences if you decide to have the baby, or why should you have it, and think of all disabled people that are living with us. I mean, we're talking a lot about inclusion and inclusive societies, at least for the couple of 2 or 3 years, that's a big subject. And so if you decide to maybe abort a baby because it's going to be disabled, then you're actually humiliating the lives of disabled people, because you're saying their lives are not as worthy of living as us normal people. So there's definitely a really difficult ethical component to that issue. But I think still, I should be the one to be able to decide if that's the right thing for me or not, and if, yeah.
But the society and the laws give you the frame of your own thinking. If the society would change in that regard, that if you have a disabled child and people would look at you strangely, then you would think, oh, I did something wrong, or why do I have a disabled child? I mean, the law comes out of the mentality and the ethical understanding of a society, and the majority always reflects that on the minority. And again, it's not only the question of that specific couple, because I guess I have friends who have kids, and if they had known by a doctor that their child had this or that disease, I mean, they say we wouldn't know what we would have done, even they are Catholic, you know, and even if they're not Catholic, you think about this, you know. And now the debate or the new medical improvements may allow you to even examine ovum and sperm cell before they are implanted into the womb. So that is completely another topic. But the general question, regardless if you understand emotionally what parents go through, is, do we want to live in a society where disabled people are just not you know, are perceived strangely? And I guess this is a question also to politics and to all of us. And it's not only, as you refer to it, my decision, my decision, my decision. It's true, but it's not. We are not a society of egoists. It's also a community we're forming. And so my own decision is done, or an outcome of what the society reflects on me, and I shape the society by my decision.
But is the society going to support that decision? For example, I have a friend, an American woman married to a German man. She was in her early 40s, got pregnant in Germany. She was 2 months pregnant when she moved to the United States. Her husband has a genetic disease where he will be blind within the next, at the time, it was like the next 6 years. She had a 5-year-old son. She got to the States. They said, you're older. Would you like to do genetic testing? It's not allowed in Germany. Nobody had asked her about this here. Nobody had thought about it. She said, OK, I'm older. My husband has this genetic problem. All right. She did genetic testing, and it turns out the baby had a problem. Certain chromosomes were not complete or were abnormal, but nobody could say what it meant. Maybe it was something that would mean nothing. The baby would be completely healthy, and it would be fine, and you just would compensate. Maybe the baby would have the same problem that the father and eventually go blind. Maybe it was something that would be completely deformed and have no idea. So here she is. She's already supporting a husband who can no longer drive himself to work. He can't he can walk his way to the train back and forth. He has tunnel vision that will eventually close off. She's got a young son who's perfectly healthy who she has to support, and she knows that this burden is going to be on her. And what does she do with this baby?
Well, it's not, as she says, if I understood that correctly, it's not precisely sure whether or not this baby would have.
No.
So, and if this baby, which would develop into a full person and growing up, and at the age of 20, 30, or 40, maybe face not to go blind. I mean, what do we do? Do we now, or do we support the view of aborting this child before and not allowing him to live 40 years or 30 years as a child with, or a man or a woman with the capacity of seeing? And I think this is not just an easy question.
It's not an easy question at all. But on the other hand, if this baby was then born severely deformed and unable to support on its own, or to sort of live without being in a wheelchair or other kinds of support, who is going to take care of that baby? The same woman who has to take care of the blind husband and her other child. And
yeah. There was, I mean, the example of the El Salvadorian woman maybe can guide us through this question a bit. It was clear from the beginning that her fetus was lacking a part of the brain. And so, I mean, in these cases, when the fetus is like severely deformed and has no chance of survival, the baby died, I think, 5 days after it was born. So, I mean, I would say in these cases, I mean, why go through all the suffering as a parent, even for the unborn child? I mean, it's 5 days of suffering for a baby. So I think there are certain cases where you can say it's morally acceptable.
What is morally acceptable or not is not for us to determine on the show, but unfortunately we've run out of time, and I say unfortunately because we certainly could have gone on for much longer. It has certainly showed the complexity of this subject matter. Thank you out there for tuning in, and thank you to my guests for their opinions on this indeed very delicate and complicated ethical subject matter. Thanks out there for watching.